Welcome back to Loyalty Leaders Podcast. I'm David Feldman, Chair of Loyalty Summit, and I'm joined today by Len Llaguno from Kyros. And Len's going to be joining us in Chicago for Loyalty Summit Americas on September 17th and 18th. And for those who have been to Loyalty Summit before, Len is no stranger. He's been to plenty. And Len and I have had lots of chats in the past, usually around loyalty program finance and those kind of topics that, aren't necessarily in the day-to-day realm of most loyalty managers, and people's eyes tend to glaze over a little bit. So I thought we might demystify that a little bit. And Len, maybe have you briefly introduce yourself and Kyros and kind of what you do and what is an actuary and what does an actuary do when it comes to loyalty programs? Maybe we'll start with that as the first question.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me, David. Really fun to get a chance to come chat with you again, and really looking forward to the summit here in Chicago. It's very convenient for me because I live in Chicago, so it's just going to be a hop, skip, and a jump away. But looking forward to seeing you and all the other folks there. Should be a good time. Yes. So what you sort of alluded to what we do. We literally, I like to, affectionately say we do the boringest part of loyalty programs. We work on all the financial aspects of loyalty programs. And really that falls into sort of three buckets. Liability management, right? And it's all incremental value management, and test and learn, right? All of these are centered in sort of actuarial science and finance in some way, shape, or form. And so it's actually maybe a good opportunity for me to take a step back and just say, what is an actuary? Why is an actuary doing those things, right? So for most of you probably have never actually ever heard of an actuary or ever worked with an actuary. We're sort of an esoteric profession. Not a lot of people have actually heard of it. In fact, some have. But the stereotype is the actuary is the person working in an insurance company, building the models to predict how long you're going to live. And obviously, that's pretty important if you're trying to price like a life insurance policy. So how I found ourselves working with loyalty programs is a bit odd to see actuaries working in this space. But fundamentally, loyalty programs have some actuarial problems, though. So what do I mean by an actuarial problem? What actuaries do is we basically predict over long horizons, right? And use that information to make smarter business decisions today, right? And in the context of insurance, as I mentioned earlier, being able to predict how long somebody's going to live, for many people, that's decades and decades, a long-term prediction exercise, right? And we use those predictions to make smarter business decisions today around how to run an insurance company. A similar thing exists for loyalty programs, right? When it comes to, for example, the liability, you're issuing all these points today, and you need to actually know how many of those points are going to get redeemed and how much is it going to cost you. But the thing is, a lot of those points aren't going to get redeemed for years into the future, potentially decades into the future, right? So it's a long-term prediction problem. It's a perfect problem for actuaries to solve, right? So that's a big area where we play is doing the analytics to help with liability management. Incremental value management, right? When it comes to incremental value that a loyalty program is creating, the benefit of a loyalty program really is basically the improved retention, compounding period after period after period, many periods into the future, right? And it's that sort of long-term view. Again, it's a long-term prediction exercise where actuaries can add a lot of value, right? And so it's those sorts of problems that we're uniquely positioned to help loyalty programs with.
And it's interesting, Glenn, because, when we think about some of those topics, and obviously it's the world that you and I work in, on a day-to-day basis as well. But for most people working in loyalty programs, it's totally over their head. The reality is even in very, very large loyalty programs, frequent flyer programs, hotel programs, you're lucky if you have more than two people on the team, in the senior parts of the team that are actually across this topic. Generally speaking, in the large loyalty programs, this is owned by the CFO and the accounting and the finance departments, and they might sit in a team meeting with the head of loyalty, the VP of loyalty perhaps, but that's maybe about it. The rest of it doesn't really concern, maybe in the biggest frequent flyer programs you have, a currency director that sits under the VP, for example, and they may have some visibility, into some of this, but in terms of the breakage, which is really just, the estimation of, how many points are going to expire unused in the future, or in programs that don't have an expiry policy, it's the estimation for management purposes of how many points, even though they technically won't expire, but they're still not expected to be redeemed, in the future. I mean, it's an accounting discussion, and there's accounting rules and practices that govern, how programs and brands need to actually implement this, in terms of their accounts, for the SEC reporting, or depending on where they are around the world, obviously, again, over most people's heads. But what I wanted to talk to you about is, how do you take sort of this work that you do, as an actuary, and obviously you have to be looking at the data in an incredibly granular manner to be able to make these accurate estimations of, when will points expire, how many points will expire or go unused. And, I'm guessing when you're looking at this, just sort of to go back a step in the question, you're looking very granularly at redemption patterns and how members have historically redeemed points, what size of redemption, whether it's on the airline or the hotel or the loyalty program's own product or on partner redemptions, timeline of redemptions. I'm guessing you're looking at all of that on a very, very granular basis. I mean, is that a true assumption?
Oh, for sure. Right. And so I think a large part of what we're doing here is very, very powerful and very granular analytics to help with the liability. Right. And to your point, a lot of the work around the liability, it's the chief accounting officer, the chief financial officer that really cares about it, because, they got to book that liability every quarter. They got to close the book every month, every year end. They got to go through this sort of audit. Right. It really is that side of the house that really cares a lot, specifically around like how it flows through the financial statements. But I will say it is still important with a lot of our clients. We still work with the business, the folks running the loyalty program, in a number of different capacities. Right. One of which is, breakage fundamentally still is one of the most important assumptions in the business model. Right. So for the folks running the loyalty program, they're still responsible for the P&L of the loyalty program, right? They need to understand what the P&L looks like today, what's driving it, and where is that P&L going in the future. Breakage is a huge component in that analysis, right? Redemptions is the single largest expense in a loyalty program business model, and breakage is the number one assumption that goes into that calculation, right? And so in that regard, what we do is really still quite critical. Even if the loyalty manager doesn't really get into the weeds of the monthly accounting for the loyalty program liability, which they shouldn't, they absolutely should not, they still need to understand the cost implications of the points, right? And so from that perspective, we certainly are, half our time really is working with the business to help them understand that and understand where it's going and how to navigate it, right? The other component there is really sort of centers around what you were alluding to there, like just the granularity of the data and the type of analysis that we're looking at can be tremendously valuable for loyalty program managers. The one question that every single one of our clients gets is, how much incremental value is the loyalty program creating? Every loyalty program manager gets that question. And I have yet to meet one that's like got a really good answer that can say, look, I can point to this number and everybody's comfortable with it. And the truth of the matter is, it's that number, that estimate is not one where you can prove with 100% certainty that your number is the number, right? It's always an estimation exercise, because you literally cannot observe a world where the loyalty program didn't exist and see what happens, right? It's not possible.
You can't just turn it off for a month and say, well, let's do an A/B test here. Yeah.
100%, right? Or you can't travel to some alternate universe where it doesn't exist and see what happened, right? Like, it's not possible. So there's always some level of estimation. Actuaries are tremendously valuable in being able to answer that question, because again, what is so important when articulating the value that a loyalty program creates is improved retention, not compounding one period in the future, but 2 months in the future, 3 months in the future, 4 months in the future, 1 year in the future, 2 years in the future, like over a really long horizon. A small change or a small improvement in retention really compounds and drives long-term financial value. And ultimately, at the end of the day, enterprises are valued on sort of the long-term future profitability of the business, right? And this is where we're sort of uniquely positioned to help answer this question around incrementality, is because we have the ability to look over those long horizons and quantify how the loyalty program is changing retention and how that translates into enterprise value, right? So that's a big part of how we can help the loyalty manager side of the business, not just the CFOs. And then that's just scratching the surface, right? Because once you answer that question, naturally the next question is, okay, now I know we're creating enterprise value, which is wonderful because I can go back to my boss and have everybody realize like we're doing a great job, we're creating a lot of value for the business, right? But naturally the next question is, how do I actually create even more incremental value? What are the behaviors that are most effective at driving incremental value, right? And that again is an area, once you have these actuarial models to be able to quantify incremental value, you can start, if you know how to do it and you have the right tools, you can start interrogating those models to really understand what are the levers that actually drive incremental value, right? And then from there, you start to better understand like, okay, what are these levers? What are the levers I can pull? What should I be pulling, right? To drive even more incremental value. So when we look at it in a year's time, you're driving even more incremental value, right? And so you can pat yourself on the back even more and hurrah with all your colleagues and your boss even more about, the value you create for the enterprise.
So, let's say I'm a sort of a middle manager in a loyalty team, and I understand what you're saying. And certainly I understand the importance of the redemptions. I'm probably managing redemptions. My boss is, coming to me, in the third quarter or the fourth quarter every year saying, hey, let's increase some redemptions. Let's run some promotions. Not an unfamiliar scenario for folks. But the other thing that loyalty managers and teams are being tasked with, and sort of it's really day-to-day table stakes, is I've got my offers, I've got my promotions, I've sort of got my segments or my segmentation strategy with my members. Maybe it's basic, maybe it's around my elite tiers, maybe it's onboarding, maybe it's life cycle based, combination of all of the above. But the struggle that I think that we hear from loyalty managers all the time, I know you hear it when you're talking to them, we certainly discuss it at Loyalty Summit all the time, is, we talk a lot about personalization, about segmentation, about one-to-one communications, whatever the buzzword might be. The truth is, as a general rule in the industry, we do it very poorly. And we can argue that maybe some of the tech and the tools are to blame for that. Some of it is manpower. A lot of it is manpower. And a lot of it really also is just, well, how can we be smart or smarter about segmenting the right way? But the other thing is segmenting is only part of the equation, right? Because we can segment and we can send out offers, but then we need to be able to do the analytics afterwards. And it's not just about coming up with some post-promotion reports. We then need to learn from that to reaction that into the next promotion, to hopefully iterate on that to get better and better. And obviously that's the goal. And if you ask a program manager or a manager in a loyalty program who's responsible for part of this, they're going to say, oh yeah, we do that. And I think you and I have certainly seen lots of this. We do that. The question is perhaps how well, or are we truly aware of the performance of our campaigns and how we're iterating on them? So given what we've said and sort of this really granular work with the data, from an actuarial perspective, different from an analytical perspective, but how, with some of the work and the projects that you've been working on, how can we take some of that really granular data about redemption history, about estimates of future value, and future redemption activity, the valuation of a point, things like that, to be able to, in a smarter way, much more be able to target our segmentation for our campaigns and our promotions in a much better way to be able to hopefully generate more lift and incremental value, but two, be able to kind of on the fly and in real time or close to real time as possible, be able to analyze the impact of that to be able to be ready to go for the next round of campaigns and promotions, whether it might be a win-back promotion or maybe it's part of your onboarding life cycle to really step up new members, up that value chain. Can you talk to that a little bit about how the use of this data can really be relevant to the loyalty program teams as a whole when they're thinking about their campaigns and promotions?
Yeah, for sure. So there's so many dimensions to that, David, that I'll start with just this notion of segmentation. Before you even start doing some campaigns, there's obviously some level of segmentation you want to be putting into place. A lot of companies that we see, they have this notion of tier, right? And they're using tier as their main segmentation scheme. And what we have found when we build these models to predict customer lifetime value is that tier is actually not the greatest segmentation tool. As it turns out, there's a ton of really high valuable members that are in your lowest tier, right? And we've sort of seen that time and time again across all loyalty programs. And that actually makes sense because tiers often just like the higher premium tiers are really just focused on maybe your top 5% or something like that of members. And undoubtedly they're valuable. But the people between, the 80th percentile and 95th percentile are also tremendously valuable, right? And usually they're just hidden away in your lowest tier and you have no way of knowing who they are and therefore no way of segmenting them out and really targeting them, right? And so building these actuarial models to quantify incremental value and customer lifetime value are really useful as a segmentation tool to be able to identify those people, right? So it sort of starts there. But to be really, really good, I believe you need to go beyond that. You need to do what we call test and learn, which other people call some level of like A/B testing and that sort of thing, where you're actually running experiments and figuring out what actually works. And you got to do so with the proper sort of control groups. So you're holding people out that aren't being exposed to these things. And running these experiments and trying to figure out from those experiments what works and what doesn't work. Right? I would say a lot of loyalty programs are not even doing that. But if they are doing that, then really they're kind of stopping at an aggregated analysis of the data. They're really just looking, okay, we ran this campaign, and in total, across everybody in the campaign, yes, we saw a statistically significant lift in the performance and the conversion relative to the control group that got nothing, right? But again, if that's where you stop, you're missing so much of the value. So much of the value actually comes from de-averaging, right? The actual results of that particular experiment and using machine learning to try to identify subsegments within that population where the campaign worked really, really well. And also identifying the subsegments of the population where the campaign didn't work at all, right? When you can do that, what you quickly realize is that overall result that you looked at for your campaign, where perhaps, let's just make up numbers here, you saw a 50% lift, right? That 50% lift in aggregate is a mix of segments where you had really good ROI, really good lift, right? Maybe 200% lift. And a couple other segments where you actually saw like negative lift, right? It just nets out to that 50% lift in total. When you can identify those more granular segment level, then suddenly you're in this position where you can just like stop doing what doesn't work, where you get a negative lift or where you get negative ROI, right? That immediately is going to improve your overall ROI because you're getting rid of the waste. And then the other thing that you could do is you now also have learned what actually works for all these different segments of the population. You know what offer actually works well, right? So you can do more of what works. And that too will increase your overall ROI, right? So the combination of those two things, being able to stop doing what doesn't work and do more of what works, is the key to being able to drive better and better ROI, right? And so what we like to do with our clients is basically work with them to build the process and the infrastructure to do this continuous learning, where we're running experiments and continually getting better and continually learning what works and what doesn't, so we can do more of what works and do less of what doesn't, right? Ultimately, that just puts you on the trajectory of improving your ROI and improving the incremental value that you can create. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely it does. And I like what you're talking about in terms of continuous learning, because I think that's really where I was trying to go with the question. And that is, again, thinking about day-to-day operations of a loyalty program, and, forgetting about these sort of topics that, that's accounting and finance. I don't need to worry about that. But my day-to-day job, for most program managers, is the operations of my program, campaigns, promotions, enrollment, reducing churn, and trying to get, I used the term real time earlier, but timely analytics that are actionable, actionable insights. At the same time, and I want to pick up on something else you said there as well. And that is sort of, I'm going to paraphrase, use different words, but, unprofitable members when it comes to your promotions. I don't want to mean that the members themselves are unprofitable, but what I mean is if you target your promotions too broadly, okay, you are getting a much lower ROI on that promotion, which means you either have less to invest in your best customers because obviously your most profitable customers, your best customers that are going to respond to your promotions, if you can invest more and be more generous, to a certain point, you're going to get a better behavioral response. And let's just say that it's about spending more money. You want to get customers to spend more money. If you can get the right incentive and you can maximize the generosity there to the point that you're maximizing the return, that's the goal. But if you're going too broadly and there's plenty of members there that being dilutive, or you're just throwing, money at them, points, benefits, whatever it might be, but you're not getting any incremental response from them, you have less to give the ones that will respond more. I mean, I think everybody understands that. So the ability, I think, to sort the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, is a relevant tool. When we think about new technology that's available, whether it's AI or just better loyalty management platforms, how does that play in to what we're talking about here?
Yeah, well, you can do so much with the compute these days. A lot of our clients, I think, the first question they ask is, you want that data? We get the transactional data from all of our clients. Every time a member earns a point, there's a redemption, there's a transaction. Every time they redeem, there's a transaction. Every time they expire, there's a transaction, et cetera. That level of granularity is what we want. And without fail, every company says, well, that's a lot of data. You want that? Well, yeah, there's so much richness in that data that is really being untapped today. And that's where the technology comes into play. We've set up a ton of infrastructure to be able to, basically crunch all that data in a very effective way, build these massive machine learning models on top of that data to be able to extract insights from it and make it tremendously valuable. Data is really a resource that's sitting idle for a lot of these loyalty programs, and they're not tapping into it the way that they really should be, right? And that's where it starts for all of us. And so I'd say, a big component, if you're just really distill down what we do, is we get into the weeds of that data. We're extremely good at that, and figure out how to extract the insights from it to help you drive better business decisions, be that with the liability, right, and understanding costs, or more for our audience here, incremental value, customer lifetime value, how to drive test and learn, how to maximize ROI. All of that comes from that rich set of data. The technology exists to be able to do that today. 15 years ago, probably not, but certainly today, yeah, we should.
And I think what you just said was right as well. I mean, what we're talking about here is sort of, it's the data set and the analysis, the actuarial process of the analysis of this particular data. It's multi-purpose, because there absolutely is this financial side and the accounting side, and that 100% goes in hand. But that same data analysis can be used to leverage your promotional operations. But the results of those promotional operations feed back into a more accurate assessment of earning and redemption activity, which directly leads to your breakage assumptions, your valuation of a point, and all those other financial and accounting considerations. So they sort of absolutely go hand in hand. And if we think about this, even if your concern is the accounting side of the equation, the reality is the better the richness of that data, the better your accounting assumptions are going to be, and you're going to have to make less, true up adjustments as you go forward, which obviously the board and the market don't want to see lots of, because it makes them nervous about, well, was the data accurate to start with? So if the data is actually being leveraged and used day-to-day operations to test and learn and improve on, and become richer in terms of the accuracy of the data, that's going to help your CFO become more comfortable as well. So, if you're still in this mindset or this sort of where you have this testy relationship with accounting and finance, whether it's because you actually have a testy relationship or you just don't understand what they do, it's like this mystery black box, this can help you have a closer relationship because you are working together, and you're both learning more about, oh, this is kind of cool, or we can fine tune more and we can improve those results, which to your point earlier, if you are the leadership team of the loyalty program, you own the P&L. Ultimately, you want to drive better results. You're going to look better. Everyone's going to keep their job, or if you're fighting for more budget for the program, you're going to have a greater degree of success in winning that argument, or at least prosecuting that argument, if the commercials and the P&L is stronger, and you can demonstrate that investing in your members or investing in your promotions or investing in your redemption catalog is actually driving positive ROI results. Those conversations with finance, when you're having those budget arguments, are going to go so much better.
Yeah, it's so critical because I know, everybody watching this knows loyalty programs are value generators, but most other people think that loyalty programs are cost centers, right? And what we talked about today is how cost is really important, but it also goes with the value. And there's like this cycle, they're all connected, right? Ultimately, it's in pursuit of creating value, not driving costs, right? And if we do it right, the actuarial work that we do helps paint the picture of loyalty as a value creator as opposed to as a cost center, right? And that's ultimately where we try to leave our clients all the important stakeholders in our client organizations with that mindset, right? And I think actuarial science is sort of uniquely positioned to be able to do that because you really can't understand the value that a loyalty program creates, right? Like value that a loyalty program creates is like sort of the net profit above and beyond the cost. Mm-hmm. You can't understand that without first understanding cost, right? So we focus on cost not to drive cost reduction, but rather to open up the conversation to then think about value, right? And that's really important.
So, you and I geek out on this. We love the commercials, the finance aspect, all the rest of it, but a lot of people working in programs, are more creative minded, or they're more on the member engagement side, but when it comes to the accounting, the finance, the data, the commercials, the P&L, they're just like, I feel out of my depth, and that's not my area of strength. What's your advice to those managers in a loyalty program that description is apt for in terms of so getting over the psychological barrier of and starting to embrace this use of the actuarial science?
Yeah, well, so I would caution loyalty program managers, and we've seen this time and time again, doing the liability management work or sort of working with your finance team to try to do the liability management work without an actuary is very, very, it comes with a lot of risk. We've seen time and time again where loyalty programs, they have somebody in finance do it or they have somebody in marketing do it, and they don't have the proper actuarial training. And sure, yes, they come up with a number, but as it turns out, it's the wrong number. We've seen people booking breakage 50% lower than it needs to be. We've seen people have liabilities understated by $100 million. Like when you look at it with the proper actuarial lens, it's very, very clear what it should be, right? And all these other methods that companies are using without actuaries can actually lead them astray. So I just sort of caution that, and it is a best practice to have an actuary look at the liability side. But when you do that, don't let your actuary just stop there, right? There's so much more to the actuarial analytics to, again, help you really focus and understand value and how to drive value and how to convince others that you're creating value. That's ultimately where actuaries will, with the right training, can add the most value for you and, for loyalty program managers.
Len, thank you so much for joining today and having a chat. And for those of you where this conversation might have been a little bit over your head, but you still feel it's like, I think I need to learn a little bit more about this, or I have questions for Len. Len, you will be joining us in Chicago on the 17th and 18th of September for Loyalty Summit. So folks, if come along, loyaltysummit.com. There's still tickets available. We have a fantastic two-day program. And I think we're going to be jumping in to visit a Cubs game while we're there as well.
Excellent. Looking forward to it.
Thanks again, Len. Looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Bye, everybody.